Hi, everybody. Welcome to our career path panel. Today we have with us Revant. I'm so excited that you're here.
I'm Revant Kanvar. I am currently based in London, where I work for EY Parthenon, which is a strategy consulting firm. I'm a manager or a consultant at the firm, and I've been working here since about 2016, so about 4 years. Prior to that, I attended my undergrad at the London School of Economics, where I did a BSc in economics. And then prior to that, I graduated from TISB. So I was there from my 9th to 12th grade and graduated in 2013. So it's a good question, I guess. So with strategy consulting, there's no 2 days that are exactly the same, but I can give you a bit more flavor in terms of what work we do and what that means for me. So typically with the work that we do, it is either falling into corporate strategy or it works into deal or transaction-based work. And on the corporate strategy side, that's basically us working with the C-suite, so like the CEO, CXO, someone in a high decision-making role, to help them typically with the firm's growth agenda. And so what that means for the work that I do is we're either helping business leaders make a decision in terms of which markets to enter, to help them assess if there are any interesting areas. So like if it's AI or like a new product that they could be developing. And then there's also a piece around looking at what competitors are doing on that particular front. So it's assessing how competitors have grown their market share, what they're doing that's innovative. And so the work that I do is essentially help them through that process. So it's about structuring research that we do to assess the market size, to understand the growth opportunity, to speak to experts in these particular fields, and then collate all that information and share it with management to help them make a better, more informed decision. So that's about 40% of the work that I do, which is on the corporate strategy work. The balance is actually focused on private equity clients or deal-based work. And so that's really looking at certain assets. So these are companies that are typically less than about $1 billion in revenue. And it's essentially looking at what makes them such, like what's their value proposition, what makes them so special. And so it's about, again, similar to the previous one, which is like speaking to competitors, speaking to experts in the field, trying to understand what makes these companies so special, understanding where the market is moving, what the threats of disruption are for these particular companies, and essentially helping private equity clients make the decision whether they should invest in a company or not. Sure. So obviously, so I attended TISB, like I mentioned, from my 11th to 12th. And so I applied both to the US as well as the UK schools. I ended up choosing LSE because of what you mentioned. So it is one of the better schools for economics globally. And so for me, it was an area that I was interested in. So that's why I decided to go there. But the application process, as you can imagine, and you probably go through it, is completely different from the US schools. My experience at the LSE, what's a bit interesting, like it's a bit of a mixed bag compared to a lot of the experiences that your friends in the US go through. So because it's a 3-year course, there's a little less flexibility in terms of the kind of courses that you can do. So to give you an example, like the way you're evaluated at LSE is that you have 4 courses that you choose for each year. And at the end of the year, it's like a 100-mark exam, and that's it. So coming out of TISB, it's a big shock to the system because we're used to getting a lot of regular tests. Here, it's kind of like you've got 4 questions, 25 marks each, and you've kind of got to answer the question. So in terms of the academics and the demands of it, it's far more rigorous, and it's closer to, I don't know if people have done the Indian system, it's closer to a bit more on that front. But overall, like for me, the experience was so educationally, the experience is very different from what you go through in the IB, and so it's about rigor and going deep into whatever subject that you take. And so what that means is, like in your first year is the only year when you have a bit of flexibility to choose courses outside your department. And so my favorite course through my 3 years at LSE was actually one in political theory, which is completely far removed from economics. And then, but from your second and third year onwards, it's very much focused on economics or whatever your degree is. And there's less flexibility to switch courses because you've been admitted to a specific department rather than to the wider university. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I mean, overall, being like, I think with LSE, it's a very small campus, so it's very different from what you experience if you go to boarding school. But you have to expand your mind and think of London as being the campus. And so London's one of those incredible cities where it's one of those few ones where there's like it's a center for four major things, right? Like it's a political center, it's a financial hub, it's a social and cultural hub, and it's an educational hub. So it's kind of got all of those pieces to it, and so you end up meeting and doing a lot of fun things throughout your experience there. And just on my own personal experience with LSE, one of the things that got me through it was I'm a big football fan. I play football every week, even today. And so just being in the UK where there's such a strong culture towards that was helpful. Like if I had known how rigid the UK system was, it would have been really helpful. Like I'm not saying I would have gone back and gone straight to the US, but you have to keep in mind that the way that the UK teaches you and the way that your university programs are structured, it's very much focused on depth in that particular experience. And so what you miss out on is like I have friends that have done courses in like astronomy, they've done stuff on coding, they've done stuff in a lot of other fields, which I like at LSE. You can do it through, let's say, extracurriculars, but it's not something that's assessed. So that's the one piece that it's about whether you go deep early in your career and then you're kind of focused on that, or you get a bit more breadth of experience, and that additionally also obviously helps from that perspective. I think the key to remember though is like the college application process is it's a process where like it's very tough because you go through a lot of applications. There's a lot of rejection as well that a lot of people go through, and at the end of the day, where you end up coming through with your decisions, it kind of works out either way. Like I have friends who've gone both to the US and the UK. Like you will find your fit there, but if you know going upfront through your applications that like, look, I'm not 100% sure what I want to do, then I think the US is a better system from that perspective. It just gives you that opportunity to be a bit more flexible. The campus experience is really important, and it's very different from let's say what I went through at LSE. And so when it came to my decision making at the point, it was like I've done 4 years of the ISB, which is a very nice sheltered environment on the outskirts. So I kind of wanted to move back into a city. I've kind of grown up in a city all my life up till then. And so that was the decision making process. But when you're on a campus university, you just get a lot more opportunity, and it's a bit of a bubble. So I can talk to my friends who went to NYU or one of the New York schools. They had a very similar experience to LSE in the sense that you're living in a very gritty real world, and everything is very close to you, but it's A, more expensive, B, there's just like you have to travel to get to things. You have to like there's not much of a college campus atmosphere, so that's what you're kind of trading off on. And the ones who've gone to a campus, for instance, it's a bit more of a sheltered environment. You get to explore and do a lot more things just because they'll have a lot more facilities. So like, for instance, like football I mentioned earlier, I used to travel every week. So we play twice a week to different parts of London. So these are like in zone 6, they're in like parts in the north. So like you actually have to travel and make an effort to go there. You have to make an effort to go train. Whereas when you're on a campus university, you kind of have a bit more support. There's a bit more access to teachers and teachers as well if you need support academically. Your friends and you are all in the same campus. It's a bit more protected. So it's a completely different ball game. And so it's just about what you're looking for. So yeah, so to be completely honest with you, I think in terms of what I studied at, so the way the economics course is structured, let's say at LSE, is very mathematical. So it's very different from what you expect as you go through IB. So in many ways, like I joke about this, but I'm like a glorified math major. Like all that you do is statistics and calculus. And so it didn't necessarily help me so much when I joined my team at work. Like obviously you get to work, like I think what you gain through university wherever you go is the fact that you'll have some group projects and you'll have to work with some really smart people, and you won't be able to solve every answer on your own. So it's about making friends and working on some tough, challenging, or interesting projects together, and then putting that together. And that's the skill set that really translates into your workplace. And so that's kind of what's helped me at Parthenon, because effectively with consulting, you are working with some incredibly bright people. You're working with clients that have more experience than you've probably been on the planet. And so it's about actually thinking quickly and trying to structure problems very quickly and using resources as quickly as you can uh, to get a better answer. And that's the thing, that regardless of where you study, you will kind of get that experience through both the US or the UK. So you have to think about both transition periods as being quite interesting. So the first time you go abroad to university is a major change, because suddenly you're expanded to this vast field where, like, you can have that additional flexibility, or it's about you making a decision that will help shape the next 4 years. And I think when you come to picking a career as well, or starting off at least in your career, it's kind of at the same point. Like, you could decide to narrow down on it, but actually employers aren't like they're looking to train you. And so the one good thing I will say about the UK is, especially in the city of London, you have some of the best graduate programs in terms of training and getting a bit of that rigor. So for instance, my colleagues who started didn't necessarily come from a similar background in economics or management or even statistics. Like, we have people that are philosophy majors, we have people that have studied classics and history. So it's very different what your academic background is and then what you decide to do in your career. And the other thing to remember is that you'll always have, like once you've got the basic skill set about, like, look, you can work well under pressure, you can work well in a team. It really doesn't matter what you do next. Like, you will get the training to help you answer those questions, and you will have a couple of years to figure out whether it's for you or not.
And I think that's really interesting, because like that's something I think that's like very central when you talk about like liberal arts and the small liberal arts schools in the US, right? Like their whole
Mhm.
point is that like with their like very relaxed rules and their extreme amount of freedom is that like I mean, I don't want to say they don't really care what you do, but they care more about the skills that you learn. So like I find that really interesting. But yeah.
For me, with TISB is really a bit about that teaming and like, just working with people from all over the country on, like, crazy things, right? Like, whether it's like even the like raising up against the school about how bad the food is, or like playing on the same team, or like even going for like your classes and stuff. Like, it's about you have such a varied experience, and you get to meet people from all over the world. Like, we have people from Korea, you have people from the UK, US, Germany. Like, it's you get that early exposure, and you get a bit of that sensitivity and understand where people are coming from a lot earlier than many people when you first go to, let's say, university, right? Like, it's for many people, it's the first time they're away from home. They're let out, you're responsible for whatever decisions that you make and like how you behave in a public setting. And I think that's where, if you come through boarding school, and especially if you made it through the ISB, you've kind of got that experience firsthand. You are responsible for what you do over there, and you're responsible for how you conduct yourself. And that's really what matters when it comes to work as well, right? At the end of the day, look, having like because you've gone through also that rigor academically and you can think analytically. Like, for me, the biggest thing that I gained from TISB was that it helped me to uh, think logically and structure my thoughts really well. And like, you might joke about it, like when you're doing TOK or like the extended essay, but the IB program really lends you to think about things beyond like a simple yes or no answer. It's about actually getting at the root of problems. And so when it comes to, like, at least in consulting especially, it's really helpful to know that, like, okay, you can back yourself, you can make informed decisions and things logically. But more important than that, because you've come through such crazy times together, you are unafraid to ask someone for help, and you kind of trust other people a bit more than in many other circumstances. And I think that's what really helps. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're spot on. Like, I think with most campus universities, and definitely more so in the US than the UK, uh, you tend to stay on campus. Like that's the center of your life effectively for 4 years. And so you do get a bit more of that protection to some extent. I also think let's like in the US, um, because a lot of these campuses are far away from the city, there might be a little less diversity than you would see in, let's say, some of the city campuses or like in the UK, for instance. So yeah, so definitely very valid point. But I still think like what happens is you do get that wider exposure because these are you're getting to meet people that you would not have normally met, and so it's still an interesting boiling point, effectively, or melting pot for like people to come and meet together. I think on the UK, it gets a bit more real because of the fact that you do have to move off campus in your second year and it can be quite worrying for a lot of parents, especially because it's the first time like you're effectively renting a flat on your own. You don't know who the person you're staying with, and if you're on a budget, then it is like the accommodation I lived in was ridiculous. Like I stayed with my second year, I basically stayed with three other guys. One person was from the Faroe Islands, which is like I didn't even know it was a country until I met him the first time. And we were sharing like a really tiny house where we were just cooking through a kitchen and like different tastes and everything. So it's a very different experience from campus life where you might have catered food and stuff. So yeah, uh, it's a challenging point. But like having said that, I also have friends who stayed on like student accommodation through their 3 years. So it's what you make of it. So the thing with consulting is it's the best way to think about it is it's a lot like your G4 projects or something. So it's like you're actually just working on something where you've got a couple of weeks to get at the actual answer of a critical question. Except the client is paying a hell of a lot of money for advice, and B, it's about trying to answer the three or four most challenging questions that they have to make an informed decision. And so the work and the decision making that you get, and I started obviously as an associate and worked my way up the ladder, is that you have to think about how are you going to answer these questions. So, for instance, the kind of work that we do will be typically you'll have like primary research or secondary research. And so that means that we might need to conduct a survey to understand what decision, like if I took the example of a software due diligence case for private equity client, okay, so the client would like to know, um, is this an interesting company and is it in a fast growing market? Now that's just a very broad question, but you then need to think about how you're going to structure that. So it's I'm going to try and speak to experts, and so you will basically reach out to agencies that will help you find the right experts to speak to. But then you have to think about which questions you want to ask them and structure that out. Then it's about like if you wanted to do a survey, then you'd have to write a survey. Then there's about pulling financials for companies just to understand and back up the assumption that look, this market is growing really fast. And then there's the other piece, which is about speaking to former employees at the company to try and understand like what was their perception. Did they think the company was doing well? Have they invested their money well? And so on and so forth. So what you get responsibility for decision making is very early in your career, you get to decide how you're going to answer this question. Then you get to do the actual work, and then you get to sit across in a meeting from someone who is running a company for the last 20 years, or a private equity investor that's about to put in, let's say, 100 million pounds behind a particular investment, and say like, look, this is the reason why we think this company is good, because it's a fast growing market, it's a profitable business, it's a really important product for its clients, and because it's very tough to switch this out, let's say. And this is why we think there are certain risks. So if someone else decided to buy it, let's say an Apple or a Microsoft decided to buy a competitor, then you could potentially lose the entire value of investment. And so it's thinking about those kind of questions, but the decision making that you're involved with is thinking about how you're going to answer those. So it's been a very interesting journey, to be completely honest with you. So when I started off, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do in my career. So I had an opportunity to get into data analytics with MasterCard, and that would have been in the US. So I did an internship there. So that was a very different experience. Or I was kind of ready to, I was open to trying something new, like experimenting with different projects. And that's kind of where you pick consulting, because you just, like my first 2 years in consulting were like a crash course on business models. So it's about trying to, because you're a generalist when you start off, especially with EY Parthenon. And so that meant is I've worked on cases from, let's say, frozen fish all the way through to like gene therapy. And like I'm not an expert. Like I dropped science when I did my undergrad, effectively. And so it's about getting up to speed and learning about these things really quickly, and really trying to understand what makes certain businesses tick. And at the end of the day, every business has like a revenue component and a cost component, and there's certain price and volume drivers that you can think about. And that's where you build up that skill and the confidence from an early stage, because you pick up the skill set to understand how to do different research parts. So how do you code a survey? How do you make the questions not leading? How do you interview someone who is 50 years old and might have worked with their dad and essentially answer tough questions about like why they think this company is good, or why they think this market's an important market, or why they think it's a terrible market, and how do you handle that? And so when you start off, especially like at least my journey has been like you start off in an execution role, and it's a lot about making slides and like trying to present information in a concise format. And then as you move your way up to kind of like manager and then beyond, it's about really filtering out all the noise. So it's really getting at like writing out like these are the 3 or 4 points I want to convey, and these are the 3 or 4 points that like I trust my team to have done the right research on it, but this is what the findings have showed me, and this is where the value is going to be added. And so it's being able to structure your thoughts really well, handle discussions with very senior people, and presenting your thoughts and not being scared of sharing them. So it's really those. It's an interesting one. Like I think it always just starts with the most simple thing, which is raising your hand. And so it's really about like, and this is the thing that will strike you most between the UK and the US, like especially coming out of TISB. In the UK, when I was at university, you would sit in class and there'd be 15 people, and no one would want, like the teacher, like whatever, like you, like the class teacher effectively would ask a question and no one would want to answer it. It was like, it was a competition to be how silent you could be. And I think that was a quirk also about LSE, because the mix of the students was interesting, and we had people that were just very mathematically focused. So I think my course, let's say in political theory, why I enjoyed it, was because you had people that were a bit more outspoken and outgoing. And I know, like, especially when I'd been to the US and like interned in the US and stuff, like people are just a lot more outspoken and they're not afraid of sharing their thoughts. Coming back to your original point, like I think in high school, you might think like some of these assemblies are lame, or you might think about like playing in a team is a bit like, oh, it's a major commitment and stuff. But it's like take a risk. Like you can try it out and then make the decision for yourself, but don't exclude yourself from that decision making. Like, I mean, like one of my most fun things at LSE was when I did ultimate frisbee. I was like, who's going to play frisbee? But it was like, it was actually like a fun thing, and you get to meet new people, and you kind of get to hear their story in many ways. Like at the end of the day, like it's about the experiences and the people that you meet, and what you can learn from that, as well as if you can relate to people. And so I think from a young age you kind of get thrown into that at TISB, and then when you come to university, I think it's on you, because there's no one who's going to force you. Like they do have ice breaking events, but it's on you to make that extra effort, uh, to reach out to a friend across the corridor, to go and try something new. That's really where it is. And you know what? The toughest thing I think, like through TISB, and then also when you start applying for jobs, and this is what it just sucks, is like basically you deal with a lot of rejection, and the best way to deal with that is to speak about it to like family, speak about it to friends, and like you're kind of all in the same boat. You're not explicitly competing with each other, but you kind of grown up with these people. So it's fine to share your thoughts. Like just don't keep it in. Sure. So I'm probably not the best. Like it depends on what you're looking for. So like from a work-life balance perspective, I'll be completely honest with you. Like Monday to Thursday for my first 3 years, I basically had no life. Like I was working from 9:30 in the morning till on average I'd say 11 p.m., which means every week I was working post 1 a.m. 2 days straight. So like that was kind of like I knew what I was getting into in consulting because it's just that is the expectation, and that's why clients actually pay for it, right? So from that perspective, it was. It doesn't sound like I had much of a life, but then the thing that kind of gets you through that is like the kind of culture that you have. So what that meant is like I kind of had to carve out what's important to me. So like my first year, I was kind of in this rat racing, like, look, I really want to like smash this out at work and stuff. And so like I'm gonna give up on like some of my football and like my health never deteriorated completely. Like I was still doing stuff over the weekend, but I was living life on just those couple of days. I think as you grow into it, and like I've obviously given this advice to like the associates that join this year and stuff, is you kind of again have to carve out that role for you. And so by my second year, I was like, look, football's important to me. So every Monday, I'm going to play a five-a-side game for like an hour. I would make it a point that like every couple of weeks, I would essentially try and finish a bit earlier just to meet friends like midweek. And then Fridays was great because Fridays in the UK, there's a very strong, I mean, like it's a bit of a drinking culture, but it's also more about like a de-stressing culture. So on Fridays, like everyone's out the office at 5 o'clock, and so you get to work like because you're working on like intense projects with only 5 or 6 people, but your broader team is like 100 people, right? And so on the Friday, you get to suddenly meet everyone who's finishing at the same time, and then just catch up, de-stress, talk about how horrible your work week's been or what your plans are for the weekend, and just get just have a good time. So I think I found a balance over there, but it's not for everyone. Like so, a lot of my friends, I'd say, otherwise finish at 6 p.m. and they go and they work out and they go to like a Barry's boot camp. I think with COVID though, it's kind of flipped everything over. So I think again, everyone was working very hard at the start, but now you've kind of realized like you've got to make yourself time. So whether that's cooking a meal and take blocking out that hour and a half for yourself during lunchtime, or it's about going to work out or going for a walk, like it's important that you make that time for yourself. I think COVID has definitely made people more aware about how important mental health is. I think Parthenon is like so the company when I joined was a boutique strategy consulting, so which meant we barely had to travel, but it was a very small, close-knit community. And then obviously we joined, like we got acquired by Ernst and Young, so it became part of this much larger multinational company. And a lot of like the good things about like this mental health being able to share your thoughts, uh, like as well as like just taking part in fun days. Like one of my most fun days in a year is this charity volleyball tournament that we have. But that's like 2 days in a year, which the entire team effectively takes off. And we go and we raise a bit of money for charity and we play volleyball with like other companies across London. And it's just massively fun, like because it's like a nice way to just diffuse and just completely break the routine of work. So I think with COVID, going back to your original question, what's happened is it's accelerated people's awareness of about how important mental health is because it's not just about like you're still eating, you're probably eating a bit healthier now than you were earlier because you're cooking at home. You are essentially someone who's got a bit more control over your time. But it's not enough. So like it's about trying to give people the opportunity to take back more control about how they plan their days. Because like when you're in the office, it's a bit more like everyone is working these hours, so you see what's happening. But now because you're not being able to see what other people are doing, you kind of have to trust people a lot more to make the right decisions. And whether that's like they are blocking out their time and people will reach out to you to check in to see like, hey, how are you doing? Is the work manageable? Do you need a bit more help and stuff? So I think in companies that conversation is definitely accelerated and they're thinking more about how can they help their employees. The difference, there's a big difference between the US and the UK in that in the US, like if you've done a STEM subject or even any degree essentially, you still have a year to up to 3 years to kind of be in the country on a visa and like trying to find a job, right? In the UK, the big difference is the day you graduate, I think you have about 3 months beyond that to kind of find a job. Um, but the other the benefit with the UK system is if you do find a job, then it's kind of based on merit, and then you kind of like it's a much quicker process to getting residency, for instance. So I'm 4 years into my job, and I'm a year away from getting permanent residency or the US equivalent of a green card. So that's something that you should be aware about when you are thinking if you want to work for an employer somewhere abroad. And so what that means also with the UK is, and especially it's really focused more around London, or if you're doing medicine, then there's a separate recruitment pool, is that you essentially have programs that are very structured from an early stage. And this is the thing that really shocked me, because like my first month in, and LSE is notorious. Like now when we go to recruitment, you can see like this is the one school where everyone is like very driven to try and getting into university, and we kind of joke about like how particular they are like about trying to find a new job. But essentially you have programs from your first year, which is called like a spring week if you're doing banking, and then you have a summer internship in your second year, at the end of your second year, and then at the end of your third year you kind of apply for graduate roles. So there are three different points, which I had no clue about before I came to the UK, where you apply to leading employers to try and get a role. Now, the challenge is that everyone is applying for those same roles, and like they're all your classmates, and then there's obviously all the different universities and stuff, right? So it's a very competitive process, and it's a pretty random process. Like now being like, because I like now being on the recruiter side as well as doing a bit of the CV screening, leading a lot of the interviews. The toughest part is to get in through the screening stage, and that's the one part. Like even when you're applying through to university, you have to realize it's not on you. It's like you are like your responsibility is to share your story, and it might or might not resonate with a particular person, or in many cases now is becoming an algorithm, as to whether you make it through the screening stage. And and you have to remember it is not your fault, or like there's nothing that you could do to get through that screening stage. It's a random process. There's some criteria that different companies set, and being an international student is just much harder because you have to get a sponsorship to get a visa. So that's really the first thing. And my bit of advice on this is like you just have to apply everywhere, and kind of eventually, like once you've gone through it in college and then you've gone through it when you're applying for first, let's say, a spring week, then an internship, and then the graduate job, you kind of develop a bit of a thick skin with rejection letters because it's just not on you. Now, assuming you've made it through to the interview stage, that's when it's on you to do as much research that you can, and to really make a difference. So even when you applied in the first place, it was about attending some careers fair, going through the website, really trying to understand why would you want to be in that particular firm, and why would that firm want to have you. Those are the two questions you have to ask yourself, and that's what you write at the first stage. At the interview stage, it's more about very specific requirements. So it's like they're looking for how do you work it, like there'll be like assessment days. So it's like, how do you work in teams? How do you structure problems if you're solving a case and stuff? And so that's the part where you can do a bit more prep for, go through your career counselor and stuff, to really help you through the next stage of the interview process. And then if you're lucky, then you kind of get a role. But it's a very cruel and unfair process in many ways, and it's much tougher as an international student. From my batch, there was only one person from TISB that actually went and studied in Germany, I think. And he had a great experience. So I think we are a bit like you kind of narrow your options out a bit early to the US and UK, more from a language perspective, as well as just a cultural perspective. Like either you've gone there on holiday, some family there and stuff like that. So that typically becomes a big driver of what people make a decision on. But if you know early enough that like, look, at the end of university, you probably want to find a job rather than, let's say, work in a business back home or come back to India or like do something else, then it's worth exploring. Like there's no harm in like applying to some of these universities, because the quality of education in any of these places is fantastic. Like it's really good, but there is that language barrier that makes it really hard. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. And they're also just a little less diverse than the US and the UK. That's the other piece to remember. But for instance, I think Australia and Canada, for instance, they have a lot of similarities, much better process to get residency and stuff like that. So if that's your aim and you want to get a job at the end of university, then definitely consider that. I think in terms of the resources that your university provides, it's kind of similar across the board. It's just the recruitment processes differ. So what I mean by that is each university will help organize certain fairs. So like a careers fair, they will have someone that will help you with drafting your CV. They will have people that can be career counselors that introduce you to things. They'll have committees that do like the consulting committee, or they'll have like an entrepreneurs committee, or they'll have like a coding committee. And so those are the different things. And I think what is what I've only learned much later, which gets really important, is that networks are really important when you move abroad. Like in India, you kind of all got like your family's network and like you established yourself. But when you come to one of these countries, you're kind of starting afresh again. And so that's where like, forming certain, I'm terrible at networking, so I'm really bad at this. But what I've noticed is like the people who typically find or get multiple offers for jobs are the people that have actually made that extra bit of effort to go and attend, let's say, the event at the company's offices. Plus, they've gone and they're asking and reaching out to people on LinkedIn because it's an increasingly digital world and stuff. So those are the people that actually will be front of mind for candidates, for employers, because they've made that extra bit of effort. So that's something just to be a bit aware of. But in terms of the actual facilities that you get from your university, look, they all give you that CV screening, they give you all of that support. More often than not, what helps you though is if you find like a good group of friends that are doing the applications at the same time, because you'll have tests as well to do, which means that it just helps because you'll all end up practicing together and stuff. And that's more on the UK side. On the US side, there's also a lot of campus recruitment. So employers will come to your campus to recruit, which is very different from the UK, where you typically apply online and it's a bit more cold. I've had quite a few. Like I think on a so from a personal achievement point of view, like when I'm like in terms of like actual delivering client work, it was pretty amazing to sit across from the CEO of this multi-billion dollar market research company and essentially it's like walk him through what the business plan his particular team had done and why we think it was the right plan. Like as a 20 something year old sitting across from a person who's built up this business from scratch and actually having the evidence to back up why you think they need to look at these things slightly differently, it's incredible. And then the fact is you also learn from a lot of those discussions. So for me, sitting in one of these readouts where it's like, at the end of let's say a 3 or 4 week project, you sit across from this person and you're like, well, these are the findings that we have, and these are the areas where we think you guys could have done a bit more. It was really good, and like it was also really good that they gave us good feedback on it, and the kind of like there was apprehension about accepting those recommendations because it was against what they had done previously. But then there was also like a fact that like they accepted saying like, actually, you know what, this is really good advice and this is really good analysis, so we backed it up. So that's on the professional setting. But really, like I think the most fun events are like, and I don't think we'll ever get back to this, is we used to have this training called Parthenon Offsite Week, where we spent a week every year training with all your equivalents from different countries. So last year, for instance, we had it in Dubai, and we had like all my peers from Germany and France sitting in the same training sessions as us. And then at night, it's just a massive party. And so it was just a really fun time because it's like at work, it was a crazy experience, especially when you think back, given COVID, that like we had 2,000 people sitting in a hotel in Dubai, going into a pool and just having a great time. So yeah, that was definitely a highlight.